proud member of the Dice Tower Network and a podcast about all things board games that you can listen to in less time than it takes to walk a 5K. Board game Blitz is sponsored by Grey Fox Games. This week, we're talking about mental health in board games. First, we discuss a couple games we've played recently, like Black Sonata and Viscounts of the West Kingdom. Then, we talk about how board games sometimes gamify aspects of mental health and mental illness. And now, here are your hosts,
Ambie
and Crystal.
Recently, I played Black Sonata, which is a solo deduction game designed by John Keane and made in 2017. It was a print and play. It's available as a free print and play currently, but I also got a review copy from TGG Games. So I've actually played both versions. I played my print and play copy, and then I played the review copy, and I played these on stream. So I'll link the VOD in the show notes of the most recent game I played. But Black Sonata is a solitaire game that lasts around 30 minutes, and it's a hidden movement deduction game, which sounds like it wouldn't work solitaire, but
I know,
really well.
When I first heard about this game, I don't remember if I talked about it on the podcast after I played it a few years ago,
Oh,
but
you might have, yeah.
I was baffled. I was like, how is that possible?
Yeah, so in the game, you're looking for Shakespeare's Dark Lady from the sonnets, and there's a map. So on your turn, you can move around the map. You're trying to find the Dark Lady. She moves each turn, and the way she moves is there's this deck of cards that have different icons of the different locations, and there's different ways to set up the deck of cards because there's like alphabet letters on the cards, and so you put them in alphabetical order, and that will be like the path that she moves. And then depending on which set of letters you use, it does a different path. So that's how the setup works, so that it works solo, because there's given paths for her to move. And so it gives you an icon, but the icons on the locations there's multiple icons on each location, and then the icons are in multiple places. So if it has like the icon of the beer, then you know she's in one of these couple of places, and then you change to the next card and she moves one space away, and then it gives you an icon of a tree or something, and you're like, okay, so now she has to be either here or here, and then eventually you can narrow it down, and then you're trying to land on her space and search for her. And if you search correctly, then you get to get a clue to who she is. So there's two parts to it. There's the hidden movement part, and then the clue of figuring out who she is. And that is like, there's a card of Dark Lady deck. And so you set one of them aside at the beginning, and then each one has 3 different icons on it. And so you have to figure out which 3 icons are in that card. And the other cards in that deck all have clues pointing to the hidden card. So each time you catch her, you get a new clue card, and then you have to eventually catch her again and determine who she is and like accuse her, I guess. I think it's called Confront or something. So I really like it. I really like deduction games, and I was just really impressed with how it works solo, just like how the designer got all of these things working.
Right. Like, that's the thing with this game is, like, as I was playing it, I was like, I know how the mechanisms work, but my brain still kept thinking, how does the game know where she moved? Like, that's the thing that, it just, like, it feels like a computer doing it. Like, even though it's an analog board game.
Yeah, it's really cool. So, it's not too hard at the beginning to find her, but then you need to find like multiple clues in order to deduce what her actual card is, because like just one clue won't tell you the 3 symbols that she has. But each time you find her, when you find her, she runs away. So you move like multiple cards under the deck, so she moves a couple of spaces away and you don't know where she ends up. So she keeps getting harder and harder to find. And also another thing that's interesting is every time you search for her, you replace the card in the deck with a fog card. And so you can't search again when that comes around, because you're going to be going through the deck multiple times. So there's some like memory aspect of where she went, because you want to like catch up and land on her space to be able to search for her, but then also it can't be the same time as the last time you did it, because that card gets replaced in the deck. Like, she still moves in that location, but like you can't search for her there, which is interesting. So yeah, there's deduction and memory and hidden movement all in one solo game, which plays really well. So yeah, I really like Black Sonata. It's available as print and play, but also published by TGG Games is the version I got. and I got it as a review copy. So thank you to TGG Games for that, because I was really excited about that.
That's awesome. I recently got a game to the table that I had been wanting to play for quite some time, and as things are coming slightly safer, I've been able to game one-on-one with my friend Kathy a little bit more. We're still wearing masks, obviously, and doing all that, but she came over and I got an order from Boardlandia, which is a friendly local game store that's not local to me. And in that order was Viscount of the West Kingdom, or Viscounts of the West Kingdom. How it's spelled Viscounts, but it's a French word, so you all can, take whatever pronunciation you want there. It is the third game in the West Kingdom trilogy from Garphill and Renegade Games. I have spoken in the past about how much I absolutely love Architects of the West Kingdom, which is the first game in that series. I have not played Paladins of the West Kingdom, which is the second game in the series. I skipped right to number 3. And I'm not quite sure why I did that. I think because it's the newest one, and so it's kind of the one that has more buzz at the moment. And so that was what made me pick up Viscount over Paladins, I suppose. But Viscount of the West Kingdom is a deck building game with a modular board that has somewhat of a rondel mechanism in that your Viscount moves around the board a certain number of spaces based on the cards that you play. The cards come from your hand, and even though it's a deck building game, you only play one card per turn. So it's unlike a lot of deck building games where you're kind of laying out all the cards you can. It's just a single card, but it goes to a board in front of you, and there will always be 3 slots on that board that you will fill with people, and as you add new cards to it each turn, the existing cards on the board slide to the right and then eventually off the board. And these cards have different abilities. Some of them trigger when you put the card out. Some of them trigger when they come off of the board. Some of them have ongoing effects throughout the course of the rest of the game. So even though it is a deck building game, that mechanism is not as complex as a lot of other deck building games. I would try and describe the theme to you, and I could read, what the theme is from Board Game Geek, but it means nothing in this game. I felt no theme when I was playing this at all. It felt like pure mechanisms only, which some people will be down with that. I will admit I was a little bit bummed that, it didn't feel like I was doing anything thematic at all the whole time. It was just icons and resources the whole time. But yeah, you are technically traveling around this kingdom, acquiring deeds and debts, and those deeds and debts are the crux of how the game will end, because once either the deed or deck stack is empty, that triggers the end of the game. Technically, both stacks can run out, so there are 3 different ways the game can end, because players will score based on how the game ends as well, as far as what they've collected as in those deed and debt cards. I will say that I can see why a whole bunch of people really love this game, but it's not for me. I didn't dislike it, but the whole time I was playing it, I just felt very indifferent about it. I was like, I understand what I'm doing to some degree, and I can see how things fit together, but it didn't scratch the right parts of my brain. So I think for people who like deck building more than me, they will probably enjoy this a little bit more. I will admit I'm bad at culling a deck, and there were a lot of abilities in the game that would allow you to pull people back out of your deck. And since you only have 3 cards in your hand at a time, generally, and you're only playing 1 per turn, I think culling your deck in this game is going to be important, because you're not going to be cycling through your deck frequently, so you need to make sure the cards in your deck are working well for you. And I am really bad at knowing how, what cards to get rid of. There weren't a lot of obvious cards to get rid of, things that do nothing for you. One of my weakest cards was one of the only cards I had that had a build icon on it. So I was like, I don't want to ditch that. So what do I get rid of? There's a cool little piece in the middle of the board, this plastic castle looking thing that you'll put your little worker meeples on. It has a lot of cool parts to it, and I can see how with repeat plays I might enjoy it more. But for me, I would rather grab Architects of the West Kingdom all day, every day. I love Architects, and that is primarily, I think, because worker placement games are something that I enjoy more generally than a rondel or deck building style game. So, while it was not a win for me, it's a good game. And so I would not necessarily not recommend it for that reason. It's just not my jam.
So for the theme, does Architects of the West Kingdom have theme?
It does. It's definitely not like the most thematic game, but like it does feel like, because since it's a worker placement game, in Architects of the West Kingdom, you're placing workers to do things. So, and what's cool about Architects is the actions get more powerful the more workers you place. So when you play one worker on the wood spot, you get 1 wood. Then later, if you place another worker on the wood spot, you get 2 wood. So like it feels like you now have 2 workers there who are bringing wood in for you. And then when you're rounding up the other people, because you get to pick up other people's meeples and send them to prison, it's a little more interactive, and it just feels like, oh man, like that guy over there is getting really powerful. We need to clear out some of his guys. So, you know, like it's again, not crazy strong of a theme, but it feels more thematic than this one. And I honestly, I don't know the reasoning behind why these 3 games are set kind of in the same world, other than the fact that they're some from the same publisher and cool similar artwork styles and whatnot. But I haven't looked into that to see
same designers too. So
yeah, so like, but the games are not that similar to one another, aside from the fact that the artwork looks similar and there are some shared ideas and iconography, but like if you know how to play Architects, that doesn't help you very much in knowing how to play Viscount. So like there are some icons that you're like, oh, I recognize that, but it really won't help you mechanically in learning the game necessarily. But I am still curious to try Paladins. I might try it before I buy it, though, just in case. Because this one, I don't know, I got excited about ordering games. And this one will probably hit the sell or trade pile for me. I don't see it staying in my collection, but it's good.
All right.
So our main discussion topic for today is a little bit of a heavier one than we tend to deal with here on the podcast. We are talking about mental health and mental illness as they exist in board games. And I wanted to state up front that both Ambie and I are not mental health professionals. We have not studied mental health in any type of collegiate setting. So all of the things that we're going to state here are from our perspectives as board gamers, and they reflect our opinions, but may not reflect actual scientific data related to specific things. So I just wanted to state that up front. But we still think it's an interesting and important topic to talk about.
Yep. So a couple years ago, our friends over at Meeple Overboard podcast interviewed Dan Hughes of...
Formerly of This Game is Broken.
Formerly of This Game is Broken.
And currently of Cora Quest. Yeah.
Yes. And they talked about mental health and depression in board games. So you should check out that podcast, which I will link in the show notes, if you want to hear a deeper discussion on the topic. And Dan Hughes is actually like a nurse and more qualified to talk about this, like in a professional aspect.
Right, yeah, his perspective is definitely coming from a place of more education than ours. So we would highly recommend, if you think this topic is interesting and you want to learn more, to go check out. And plus, Meeple Overboard, they're our friends. They make a great podcast anyway. So, you don't have to just listen to their episode from 2 years ago. You can listen to any of their episodes.
This is true.
And Dan is also on the Sporadically Bored podcast.
Yes.
So that you could go check that out as well. Why not? Let's hype up our friends.
Check it out once in a while. No.
Yeah, sporadically.
But yeah, basically, we were trying to think of games that portray mental health and mental illness, and it was kind of difficult to find ones that portrayed it well.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. There are a number of board games that touch on the topic, but not many that touch on it in thoughtful ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess we get over with the non-thoughtful ways. There are lots of Cthulhu type games that deal with like serious, they don't deal with, but they like use serious mental illness issues as like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like,
I mean, they use it as a mechanism via which to change the state of the game, even. Like, insanity is the word that is used,
Yeah.
I think, most often in these types of games. And
Mm-hmm.
so in games like Arkham Horror, Eldritch Horror, Mansions of Madness, Mountains of Madness, they are all based on the works of Lovecraft that are, with Cthulhu, big epic monsters that when you see them, you quote unquote go crazy. And then they use those things to often manipulate how the players in a game can act or what they can do. And it is definitely not handled thoughtfully in most of these games. It is, these games aren't, they're board games, right? It's cardboard and wood components, plastic pieces. You're not seeing anything horrific. So they just seem like a means to, I don't know. I'm torn here because I can see how, first off, the works of Lovecraft himself was also problematic. So if you, there's a lot to unpack here. And I've played some of these games and really enjoyed them. I will say Mansions of Madness is a game I really like. But when you think more deeply about what these mechanisms mean, going insane, it does seem to be, to some degree, poking fun at people who have mental illnesses. And that does not leave a good feeling in my soul and heart.
Yeah, it could just be, I think someone mentioned in the Discord, it could just be changed to corruption or something, which would...
Yeah, there are other ways. Yeah. I mean, or even fright. Because in almost every instance...
Because it's horror.
It's horror themed, right? So I think fear or fright would be a more appropriate way to handle, if you wanted to include a mechanism that changed the way a player acted. Because when you do get scared, that fight or flight response, that does change the way you think and act as a human being for many people. And so, I don't think it needs to be called insanity just because it's based on the works of Lovecraft. And I would love to see games in the future. These mechanisms are really interesting and sometimes very fun to play around with, but they could be handled better.
Yep. So then there are a few games that I think deal with maybe just general mental health in a more thoughtful way, I think. The couple that I thought of, well, with help from Reddit, and I actually asked Dan Hughes if he had any, and he had a couple. So there was The Pursuit of Happiness, which just deals with the general mental well-being. Stress is what eventually kills you in that game.
Yeah, you're literally living through your life, and stress is the thing that eventually pushes you into old age and then death at the end of the game, which sounds really morbid, but it doesn't feel morbid within the context of the game, just to be clear.
Yeah. And then there's The Holding On, The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr, which is about someone who's dying and the nurses are trying to just, what's it called?
Palliative care.
That.
Yeah, and we've spoken about Holding On in the past here on the podcast. Honestly, I still believe that it is a really neat and unique board game, and I would like to still see more games like it. Mechanically, it is not my favorite cooperative game, and it kind of bums me out because I really think the theme is interesting. It takes a dark and depressing, really, theme, and it makes it you want to play because you want to uncover the story behind Billy Kerr. And I think that learning more about, Billy Kerr wasn't a real person, but they used real stories from real people to construct Billy Kerr. And the stories in that game are fascinating.
Another game that I hadn't actually thought about, but in the Reddit thread, people were talking about The Grizzled, which is a cooperative card game about World War I. And it's not about, you're not fighting in the war. You are a team of people there, and you're just trying to survive, basically. And it deals with different traumas. So you get these cards called Hard Knocks that have different bad things that happen to you. You get different traumas, you can't see things, or you can't speak because something has happened to you. So, and you're all working together, and if one person fails, then you all lose the game. So that's more dealing with like the mental trauma from war.
Yeah, and it even has a mechanism, the inspirational speeches, where like you can give a benefit to the entire team by giving an inspirational speech. So it also reflects that sometimes other people can help when others are experiencing a trauma of some kind.
Yeah, and every turn it has support tokens too.
Yeah.
Giving to other people. So you're supporting your friends.
Absolutely.
So.
Another game I wrote down is actually an RPG rather than a board game, and it's one that earlier in my gaming career I really wanted to play, and I never have, and at this point I'm not certain I would want to. It's called Everyone is John, and it deals with a person that has schizophrenia, and all of the players in the RPG are the different personalities inside John's head. And so you are trying to manipulate John into doing specific tasks that you want him to do as one of his personalities. And obviously, schizophrenia is a really serious and often very scary mental illness. And so the gamification of an illness like that, while I believe it could make for some really fun and silly moments within the context of a game, I struggle to reconcile making something that serious and intense and, you know, traumatic for someone into something fun and lighthearted. So that one, I like I said, I think as a game idea, it's really interesting, but is that worth playing? I don't know.
And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking like there are some video games that a few indie video games. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I know there are some that deal with mental illness and like go into more what it's like to have certain mental conditions. So I've heard of a few of those that are like made by people that have those conditions or like know about it more, but that doesn't really happen as much in board games, I think. And I think maybe that's because video games might be easier to publish. There's a lot more indie video games because there's no like physical product that you need to publish. So
I mean, in theory though, there could be more print and play games.
Yeah, it's true. So
I wonder
maybe
if,
there are some that we just don't know about.
Right. I mean, somebody in our Discord who is a friend of the show, John Dubois, has actually designed a game that is getting published later this year called Heading Forward, which is about dealing with a traumatic brain injury, like a head injury, and the ongoing effects that causes. And I will admit, I'm really excited about it. I also came up with the name.
Oh, you did? Oh.
I did. Which, like, I don't need credit for that. Like, I hope John doesn't, like... but like I was excited about the concept when John first started talking about it, and he was looking for ideas for the name, and I threw that out and it stuck, I guess. So
that's cool.
I know, that's pretty neat. Another friend of the show, Adrian Siski, who used to be on the Great Way Games podcast, they're good friends of ours still, even though the podcast hasn't continued. Although, if you all hold on, I just have to give, if you don't know, they dropped a new 15 on the 15, which was a thing they used to do for their Patreon supporters. They dropped that one of those on April 1st. So if you miss Great Way Games, you should go to their Twitter feed and get the link, because it's not going to be in your podcast feed because they didn't have their account anymore for that. But needless to say, Adrian from Great Way Games did her master's thesis. She created a board game called Bitter Pills, which was about taking all of the medications that you need to live with a chronic invisible illness. And so while Adrian's illness that she was referencing in the game are physical, she has stated that anybody playing this game, it could be about both physical or mental illness. And it's a complicated game because managing an illness like that is often really difficult and frustrating, especially when it's invisible, because people think you look normal or fine. And I will say, as a person who deals with anxiety and migraines, and I have to take medication for all of those things, I sympathize heavily with that, because, like, I look normal and healthy, and a lot of the time I am struggling, and I know a lot of other people are struggling too. So I think that's really neat that she was able to design a game as part of her master's program to help explain that. Yeah. So here's the big question that we probably won't be able to answer. Is the gamification of mental illness okay? Now, I'm saying mental illness rather than mental health because I think we've given some examples of mental health being handled well in games. But I would say most of the examples we've given are dealing with mental health more so than mental illness.
Yeah.
So is the gamification of mental illness okay? Is that, I mean, obviously who determines what's okay? We're just giving our personal opinions here. For me, as is probably obvious by some of the other comments I've made already, I don't think so. At least for me personally, it doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth. And it doesn't... I like games that help me be more thoughtful about things, like topics such as this. And I think, as it stands, most board games that have aspects of mental illness in them are not helping me to be more thoughtful about mental illness. Therefore, what I've seen thus far, I think it's not okay. I think there might be a way to do it, but I just don't know what that is exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, as I was saying before about the video games, like I think some of those video games are making people more thoughtful about it. And I think that is good to just open people's eyes, make them more aware of what it's like to have a mental illness and that like mental illnesses are real things. Like just because you can't see them doesn't mean it's not an illness. So
right. Well, in video games, you know, we've discussed this before too. They have the benefit of music and imagery and
so they have more story.
Yeah, like there's more ways generally in a video game to more quickly immerse someone in a theme.
Yeah.
And I also think a lot of the video games that deal with mental illness topics can sometimes tie those into physical illness as well, which I mean, like this is probably not the best example, but the one that comes to mind, there was a video game that came out, I want to say a few years ago, called That Dragon Cancer, which I believe a set of parents created it or conceptualized it after their daughter was diagnosed with cancer. And so obviously cancer is a physical illness, but I think there are a lot of mental health issues that come with something like a cancer diagnosis. And so tying those things together, I think makes it work potentially better in some video games, and I think is more difficult to implement in a board game.
But like there are more board games coming out that are more unique and making people more thoughtful. So I think like in the future there might be potential for mental illness to be handled well in board games, maybe.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And I know that there are going to be some people out there who are like, I play board games for fun. I don't want to think. I don't want to, you know, like be made sad by a board game. I know people who won't play This War of Mine because of how absolutely depressing and sad it is. I still have never played it. Not that I am unwilling to. I just have never had a chance, but I kind of want to. For me, it's not that I need a board game to make me be thoughtful or make me feel sad. I appreciate unique experiences in board games, and those types of experiences are more rare. Therefore, I tend to gravitate toward them because I like experiencing new things, I guess, is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and like board games that make you think, like you'll learn something too if they're a thoughtful board game, like.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Like I can't speak for everybody, but I always want to become a better human, and sometimes board games help me be a better human. Like that's cool that I can hang out with my friends and have a fun time and also become a better human being. Like, yes, please give me more games that do that.
Yeah.
I'm really happy that we are tackling this topic, but obviously we are just barely scratching the surface of what this topic means. I would love to hear from some of our listeners. So if you all want to head into our Discord, link in the show notes if you're not in the Discord already, or head over to our Board Game Geek Guild, or just reply to our tweet on Twitter for this episode and let us know your thoughts, or if there are any games that we didn't mention that do handle either mental health or mental illness in a way that you think is good and thoughtful. We would love to hear about it. And also, if there was anything in this episode that we did not handle appropriately or delicately, I would love to know that as well going forward. We're making sure we're trying to be as polite and thoughtful about topics like this as we can be, but you know, sometimes we make mistakes.
And that's it for this week's Board Game Blitz. Visit our website, boardgameblitz.com, for video and blog content, as well as to get links to all our social media pages. This episode was sponsored by Gray Fox Games. If you missed out on Ragnaroks, a new game from the designer of Santorini when it was on Kickstarter, it is now available for late pledges on GameFound, so reserve your copies today. Grey Fox Games, quality games cleverly crafted. Join the Blitzketeer community on Discord by following the link in the show notes. You can support the show by leaving us a rating and review on your podcast provider. And if you want behind-the-scenes access and an invite to our private Slack channel, visit patreon.com/BoardGameBlitz. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Morrow. Technical support provided by Toby Mount. Board Game Blitz is part of the Dice Tower Network. Until next time, when you're gaming, the whole world games with you. Bye, everyone!
Bye!
Visit patreon.com/BoardGameBit.
Board game bitch. Board game bitch.
Board Game Blitz is part of the Nice
The Nice Tower Network.